I was born with skin white as snow, sold by my parents as a curse, until the day a king looked at me and saw not an abomination, but a queen. What would you do if the very thing that made others reject you became the reason someone powerful chose you above all others? I learned early that my skin was considered a curse. Moon-touched, they called me, as if the night sky had stained me with its pallor. My parents' final act before selling me to the village healer was to name me Zara after a constellation they hoped would guide me through darkness. Ironic, since darkness was the only place I felt safe. The small cottage at the edge of the dense forest had been my home since I was 7. 10 years had passed, and I still remembered the day my father placed my small hand in the wrinkled grasp of Healer Maris. "She'll be useful to you," he had said, not meeting my eyes. "The girl sees things others don't." What he didn't say was that I was an embarrassment, a burden, a bad omen they could finally profit from. Today, like every year, the summer festival would fill the village with light, music, and people. From my window, I watched them prepare. Women hung bright ribbons between trees. Men rolled barrels of sweet ale to the square. Children wove flower crowns, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. It was the one night each year I allowed myself to venture beyond my garden walls to exist, briefly, in their world. I turned from the window and caught my reflection in the small mirror above my wash basin. White hair like spun moonlight, skin so pale it seemed to glow, pink eyes that couldn't bear strong sunlight. The features that had marked me as different, as other, as something to fear. "Just for an hour," I whispered to myself, running my fingers through my long hair before braiding it tightly. Just long enough to remember I'm still human. I pulled my dark blue cloak from its hook, the one with the deep hood that cast shadows over my face. Healer Maris had sewn it for me before she died last winter. "To protect your skin," she had said, but we both knew it was to protect me from stares, from whispers, from stones thrown by cruel children. As the sun began to set, I slipped through my garden gate and into the woods. I knew paths others didn't, ways to approach the village square without walking down the main road. The forest embraced me as I moved between ancient trees, their leaves filtering the last golden rays of sunlight. Here, in the dappled light and shadow, I almost felt normal. The sounds of the festival grew louder as I neared the village. Music from pipes and drums, the happy shouts of children playing chase between food stalls, the deep laugh of the blacksmith who always drank too much too early. I pulled my hood lower and stepped from the tree line. For 1 hour, I would be just another shadow moving between torch flames. For 1 hour, I could pretend I belonged. The air smelled of roasted meat, baked sweets, and summer flowers. My stomach rumbled. I hadn't eaten since morning, too nervous about my yearly venture to think of food. I kept my head down, moving along the edges of the square where shadows were deepest. From beneath my hood, I watched young couples dance, their bodies spinning in perfect rhythm, hands clasped, eyes locked on each other. I watched mothers bounce babies on their hips, fathers hoist small children onto their shoulders for a better view of the fire dancers. A life I would never know. I made my way to the honey cake stall, where old Widow Bram sold the best sweets in the village. She was one of the few who didn't cross her fingers against evil when I came to trade herbs. I placed 2 copper coins on her table, earned from selling healing salves. "The usual, dear?" she asked, her voice kind, but her eyes never quite meeting mine. Even kindness here had limits. I nodded, and she handed me a small cake wrapped in a leaf. Our fingers touched briefly, and she pulled back as if burned. I tucked the cake into my pocket, for later eating here would mean lowering my hood. As I turned to leave, a group of young men stumbled past, deep in their cups already. One bumped hard against my shoulder, spinning me around. I lost my balance, my hands flying out to catch myself. My hood slipped back, just for a moment, but it was enough. "Moon Witch!" one gasped, jumping back. "Healer's pet is out of her cage." I scrambled to pull my hood forward, but the damage was done. A circle cleared around me as people backed away. Mothers pulling children behind their skirts, men reaching for talismans hanging at their necks. "I'm just here for the festival," I said. My voice, so rarely used it, came out as a croak. "Your kind brings bad luck," an old man spat. "Last time you showed your face, we lost half our crops to blight." I backed away, eyes on the ground. "I'm leaving. I'm sorry." As I turned to flee, I collided with something solid, someone tall. Strong hands steadied me, gripping my upper arms. I looked up before I could stop myself. Straight into eyes so blue they reminded me of the cornflowers that grew wild at the forest edge. A man's face, no, not just any man. Even I, isolated as I was, could see he was different. His clothes were finely made, his bearing straight and proud. Around him, villagers who had been ready to chase me away with harsh words, or worse, suddenly lowered their eyes. Some even bowed slightly. For one heartbeat, I forgot to be afraid. His eyes held no disgust as they took in my pale features, only curiosity, recognition. Whatever it was, it terrified me more than hatred ever could. To be truly seen was a danger I couldn't afford. I pulled away from his grip, tugging my hood back into place. Without a word, I turned and ran, pushing past startled festival goers, not stopping until I reached the safety of the trees. Behind me, I felt those blue eyes following, burning into my back like twin flames. Only when I reached my cottage did I dare to breathe again. I barred the door, pressed my back against the rough wood, and slid to the floor. My heart hammered in my chest like a trapped bird. Something had shifted in that brief exchange of glances. Some balance tipped. I could feel it in the air around me, in the sudden tightness of my skin. I pulled the honey cake from my pocket. It had been crushed in my flight, but I ate it anyway, licking the sweetness from my fingers as I stared into the dying embers of my hearth fire. "Foolish," I whispered to the empty room. "Foolish to think you could ever be one of them, even for an hour." But as sleep finally claimed me that night, it was not the hateful faces of the villagers that followed me into dreams, but those piercing blue eyes, truly seeing me for the first time in my life. 3 nights after the festival, a storm broke over the forest with a fury I had rarely witnessed. Rain pounded on my little cottage roof like 1,000 impatient fists. Wind howled through the trees, bending their ancient trunks and tearing leaves from branches. I huddled by my fire, a wool blanket wrapped tight around my shoulders, watching sparks fly up the chimney each time a particularly strong gust hit. The storm had raged for hours, like the forest itself was trying to tear free of its roots. Lightning flashed so often it turned night into a strange flickering day. Thunder rolled overhead, shaking the cups on my shelf until they rattled against each other like chattering teeth. I had long ago learned not to fear storms. They were simply the sky's way of cleansing itself. But this one felt different, heavier, more purposeful somehow. I was reaching for more wood to feed the dying fire when I heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A pounding, not on my roof, but on my door. 3 hard knocks, then silence. Then 3 more desperate than the first. Visitors meant danger. Visitors meant being seen. The knocking came again, even more urgent. I grabbed my small kitchen knife from the table and crept toward the door. "Who's there?" I called, my voice nearly lost in the howl of the wind. "Please," a man's voice answered, strained with effort. "Help us." Something in that voice made my hand move to the bar across my door. I lifted it slowly, knife still clutched in my other hand, and pulled the door open just enough to peer out. The sight stole my breath. There in the pouring rain stood the man from the festival, the one with eyes like cornflowers. but now those eyes were wild with worry. His fine clothes soaked and torn. In his arms he carried a small, limp form, a child. Her face flushed red against his chest. "You," I whispered. "You were at the festival." "Please," he said again, water streaming down his face, mixing with what might have been tears. "Not for me, for her. She's burning with fever." The child in his arms couldn't have been more than 7. Her small face was tight with pain, even in unconsciousness. I could see the heat of fever radiating from her skin, a dangerous contrast to the cold rain. I hesitated, knife still raised between us. This man had seen my face. He knew what I was. And now he stood at my door, vulnerable, asking for help. "Why come to me?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. "The village has a new healer." "We can't go to the village," he said, his voice dropping lower. And the girl said, before she fell unconscious, she said to find the Moon Lady in the forest. She said you would help. I felt my heart skip in my chest. The Moon Lady. Is that what they called me in whispers? I looked at the child again, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. I recognized the desperation in the man's voice, the sound of someone who would do anything to protect someone they loved. It was a devotion I'd never known, but somehow understood bone deep. I stepped aside and opened my door wider. "Bring her in, quickly." The man hurried past me, carrying the child to my small bed by the fire without being told. As he gently laid her down, I noticed dark stains on his shirt, too dark to be rain. "You're hurt," I said, closing and barring the door against the storm. He didn't answer, his focus entirely on the child as he brushed wet hair from her hot forehead. "Her name is Nessa," he said softly. "She's been sick for days, but tonight the fever spiked." I moved to the child's side, placing my cool hand on her burning cheek. Her skin was dry despite the rain, her small body rigid with fever's grip. I could feel her pulse racing too fast beneath my fingers. "She needs willow bark tea for the fever," I said, moving to my shelves of herbs and roots, "and yarrow poultice for the chest. I can hear congestion in her breathing." I worked quickly, mixing herbs, heating water, all too aware of the man watching my every move. When I turned back to the bed with a cup of steaming tea, he had removed his wet outer jacket and sat on the edge of the mattress, holding the girl's tiny hand in his. "You'll need to lift her," I said. "She must drink this." He nodded, gently raising the child into a sitting position against his chest. With surprising tenderness for hands so large, he helped me tip small sips of the bitter tea into her mouth. Most dribbled down her chin at first, but soon she began to swallow reflexively. "Good," I murmured. "That's good, Nessa, brave girl." Only when the child had taken half the cup did I turn my attention to the man. Now in the firelight, I could see his wound more clearly, a deep gash across his left shoulder, still seeping blood. "You need tending too," I said, setting the cup aside and reaching for clean cloths. He shook his head. "The child first. She's had what she needs for now. The fever will take time to break." I dipped a cloth in clean water and held it out. "Remove your shirt. That wound will fester if not cleaned." He looked ready to argue, then seemed to think better of it. With a wince, he pulled his torn shirt over his head, revealing not just the fresh wound, but a map of old scars across his chest and arms. This was a man familiar with violence. "I am Alaric," he said as I began to clean his wound. "The child is Nessa, my ward. Bandits attacked our caravan on the North Road. The others." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "I don't need your name or your story," I said, perhaps more sharply than intended. "Once the storm passes and the child is stable, you'll leave." His eyes, those cornflower blue eyes, studied my face in the firelight. I was suddenly aware that my hood was down, my white hair and pale skin fully visible in my own home for the first time to anyone but Healer Maris. "You have the gift of healing in your hands, don't you?" he asked quietly. They say those touched by the moon carry such magic. I pressed the cloth harder against his wound, making him inhale sharply. What they call a gift, they also call a curse. Which do you see? He didn't answer, but his gaze softened. One large hand came up to catch mine where it worked at his shoulder. For a moment, we stayed frozen like that, connected by touch, separated by worlds. Thank you, he said simply, for helping when you had every reason not to. I pulled my hand free and turned away, busying myself with preparing a poultice for the child's chest. I help because I can, I said to the herbs I crushed in my mortar, not because of who asks. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside my small cottage, something shifted. The space that had always been just mine now held others their breath, their pain, their gratitude. It felt strange, frightening, and somehow like the first clear breath after a lifetime of shallow ones. Your wound needs stitching, I said, not looking at him as I worked. After I tend to Nessa. You've shown great kindness tonight, Alaric said. I won't forget it. Don't make promises, stranger, I replied, moving to place the poultice on the child's chest. The storm won't last forever, but as thunder crashed overhead and rain continued to hammer my little home, I wondered if some storms change us forever long after the skies clear. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a flutter beneath my ribs, like a bird testing wings too long kept folded. A week passed in strange harmony. Nessa's fever broke after 3 days, but the roads remained flooded from the storm. At least, that was Alaric's explanation for staying. I began to suspect he simply had nowhere urgent to be an impossible thought for a man who carried authority in the set of his shoulders and command in his voice. The small girl took to me quickly, her bright eyes following me as I moved about the cottage brewing teas and grinding herbs. She had Alaric's dark hair, but none of his solemn nature. Once her strength returned, questions poured from her like water from a spring. Why is your hair white? She asked on the 4th morning, sitting cross-legged on my bed while I hung fresh herbs to dry. I was born this way, I answered, waiting for fear to cross her face. It didn't. It's pretty, she said simply, like fresh snow. Then, without pause, can you teach me about the plants you use? And so our days found rhythm. In the mornings, I taught Nessa the names of herbs in my garden, which to pick, which to leave, how to dry them properly. In the afternoons, when the sun was highest, we stayed inside where shadows kept my sensitive skin safe. I showed her how to grind leaves into pastes and steep roots into healing teas. Alaric watched us with quiet interest. His wound healed quickly. Too quickly, I thought, for a cut so deep. He spoke little but observed much. I often caught his eyes on me when he thought I wasn't looking. On the 6th day, I found him sitting on the bench outside my cottage, whittling a small piece of wood with a knife. Shavings curled around his boots like pale worms. Inside, Nessa napped peacefully. You avoid the sunlight, he said, without looking up from his work. I stayed beneath the cottage's shadow, my arms folded across my chest. It burns my skin, blinds my eyes. The healer who raised me said I was born with the night in my blood. His knife paused. And yet you tend a garden. I've watched you slip out at dawn and dusk. Heat rose to my cheeks, though I couldn't say why his observation unsettled me. We all find ways to survive in worlds not made for us. The whittling resumed, each stroke sure and purposeful. In the Northern Kingdom, there are people like you. They're considered blessed by the gods' winter's children. They serve as royal advisors, healers, oracles. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Is that a pretty lie you tell all the freaks you encounter? His eyes lifted to mine then, sharp and serious. I've never lied to you, Zara. My name on his lips sent a strange shiver down my spine. I had never told him my name, which meant Nessa must have heard it and shared it. The thought of them discussing me when I wasn't present made my chest tight in a way I couldn't name. That evening, Nessa begged for a story before sleep. I pulled a worn book from my shelf, one of the few possessions I had that once belonged to my mother. The leather cover was cracked with age, the pages yellowed and soft from many readings. Once, in a kingdom far to the north, I began, my finger tracing the faded words, there lived a girl who was afraid of the dark. Nessa snuggled closer to me on the bed, her small body warm against my side. From his chair by the fire, Alaric watched, his hands still working the piece of wood into shape. The story told of a girl who found a fallen star that gave her courage to face the night. By the end, Nessa's eyes drooped with sleep. I closed the book and tucked the blanket around her shoulders. "Were you afraid of the dark when you were little?" she murmured, already half dreaming. I brushed dark hair from her forehead. "No, little one. The dark was the only place I felt safe." When I looked up, Alaric had set aside his whittling. In the firelight, his face seemed softer, the hard lines of his jaw less severe. He stood and motioned toward the door. Without thinking, I followed him outside. Night had fallen fully, the sky clear after days of rain. Stars crowded the darkness above us, and a half moon cast silver light across my small herb garden. In this light, my pale skin seemed to glow faintly, as if reflecting the moon's gentle touch. Alaric stood close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You look most alive in moonlight," he said quietly. I should have stepped away, should have gone back inside to the safety of walls and routine. Instead, I tilted my face to the stars and breathed deeply. "It's the only time I don't have to hide," I admitted, "when darkness makes everyone equally blind." "Not equally," he said. "Your eyes see better in darkness than most, don't they?" I nodded slowly. "Another curse, another difference, or another gift?" His hand reached for mine. I flinched but didn't pull away. His skin was warm against my perpetually cool fingers. "Difference isn't always curse, Zara. Sometimes it's exactly what's needed." We stood in silence for long moments, connected by that simple touch. When had anyone last touched me without fear or purpose? I couldn't remember. "Why are you really here?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "You and Nessa could have reached the village days ago. The roads have been clear enough." His thumb traced a small circle on the back of my hand. "Perhaps I'm not ready to return to who I was before the storm." "And who was that?" He turned to face me fully, still holding my hand. In the moonlight, his eyes looked almost silver rather than blue. A man with many responsibilities and few choices. A man who had forgotten what it means to be seen for himself, not his position. I knew I should ask what position he meant, what responsibilities. But something in me feared the answers would end this strange peace we had found. So instead, I asked, "What are you carving?" "The wood you work each night." A small smile touched his lips. He reached into his pocket with his free hand and pulled out a small figure. In the moonlight, I could make out the shape of a wolf, its head raised as if howling at the moon. The detail was remarkable for such a small piece. "For Nessa," he said, placing it in my palm, "and for you, to remember us by when we're gone." My fingers closed around the small carving. "You speak as if you'll leave soon." "All storms end, Zira. All visitors depart." A sadness touched his voice. "But not all connections fade with distance." That night, after both Alaric and Nessa had fallen asleep, I sat by the dying fire, cradling the small wooden wolf in my hands. How strange that in just 1 week, my silent cottage had transformed from sanctuary to something that would feel empty when they left. The next morning, I found Alaric standing in my garden at dawn, his face turned toward the sunrise. I stayed in the shadows of the doorway, watching him. His profile was strong against the pink gold light, his shoulders straight despite the weight I sensed they carried. "I know you're there," he said without turning. You move quietly, but not silently. I stepped out, staying beneath the cottage's overhang, where the early light couldn't reach me. Old habit, people don't notice what moves in shadows. He turned then, his eyes finding mine across the dew-damp garden. I would notice your absence, Zara, even in the darkest shadow. Something dangerous unfurled in my chest at those words, something like hope. Hope is a luxury for those who haven't learned that the world takes what it wants from you, regardless of what you're willing to give. I had learned that lesson early and well. And yet, will you read more stories today? He asked, changing the subject as if sensing my discomfort. I nodded. Nessa enjoys them. It helps her heal. And you? What helps you heal, Zara? The question caught me off guard. No one had ever asked what I needed. What helped me? I had always been the healer, never the healed. I don't know, I answered honestly. I've never thought about it. Alaric crossed the garden to stand before me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. Perhaps it's time you did. Dawn broke gentle and pink over my cottage the next morning, light spilling through the trees like honey. I woke to the sound of Nessa's laughter in my garden, a sound so rare in my life that for a moment I thought I was still dreaming. The child's voice rose and fell in happy chatter, punctuated by Alaric's deeper tones. I dressed quickly, wrapping a light shawl around my shoulders despite the growing warmth of the day. My pale skin would redden and burn within minutes of direct sunlight, another reminder of my difference. I moved to the window, peering through the wavy glass to see Alaric lifting Nessa high to pick apples from the lone tree at the garden's edge. Higher? She squealed, reaching for a bright red fruit just beyond her fingertips. Alaric obliged, his strong arms raising her as if she weighed no more than a feather. Any higher and you'll fly away, he teased. The sight made my chest ache with a feeling I had no name for. They looked like what I imagined a family might be connected by something deeper than blood or duty. I had never known such easy joy, such casual affection. I was still watching when Alaric suddenly stiffened, his head turning sharply toward the forest path. He lowered Nessa quickly, saying something I couldn't hear through the glass. The child's smile disappeared. She ran to the cottage door, which flew open a moment later. Zara! Nessa cried, her small face pinched with fear. People are coming. I moved to the door just as Alaric reached it. His body blocked the entrance, one arm keeping Nessa behind him. Village guards, he said in a low voice. With the magistrate. Cold fear washed through me. The village leaders rarely came to my cottage, and never in numbers. When they needed my herbs or healing, they sent children or old women, as if my strangeness might be less catching to those already vulnerable. What have you brought to my door? I whispered, suddenly remembering that I knew nothing of this man beyond the care he showed for Nessa and the gentleness he had shown me. Alaric's eyes met mine, steady and grave. Trust me, Zara, please. From the path came the sound of horses and men approaching. The jingle of metal weapons or chains, I couldn't tell. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Take Nessa to the root cellar, I said, making a quick decision. Now? Alaric nodded once, scooping Nessa into his arms. I led them to the back of my one-room cottage, pulling up the hidden trapdoor in the floor. Below, rough-hewn steps led to a small cellar where I stored roots and winter preserves. Alaric lowered Nessa down, then paused, his hand catching mine. Whatever happens, he said, remember what I told you about the Northern Kingdom. Before I could ask what he meant, a pounding came at my door. Alaric disappeared into the cellar, and I dropped the rug back over the trapdoor. I smoothed my skirts, pulled my shawl tighter around my hair, and moved to answer. Open in the name of Lord Cassius! A voice called through the wood. I unbarred the door with shaking hands. Outside stood 5 village guards, their hands on sword hilts, and behind them, Magistrate Cole, a thin man with a permanent frown. Healer, the magistrate said, without greeting. "We come on urgent business." I kept my eyes lowered, a posture of submission I had learned early. "How may I serve, magistrate?" "By order of Lord Cassius, surrender the child and the northern spy." He thrust a scroll toward me, but I did not reach for it. "I don't understand," I said, genuine confusion in my voice. "What child? What spy?" The magistrate's thin lips pressed tighter. "Do not play games, Moon Girl. A man and child were seen entering your cottage days ago. The man is wanted for questioning by Lord Cassius. Surrender them now." I opened my mouth to deny again when a movement behind me made all the guards reach for their swords. Alaric stepped forward, his presence suddenly filling my small doorway. "This woman is under my protection," he said, his voice deeper and more commanding than I had ever heard it. The magistrate's face flushed red. "Who are you to claim such authority? Seize him." The guards hesitated, something in Alaric's bearing giving them pause. He reached slowly into his shirt and pulled forth a medallion that hung from a chain around his neck. It caught the morning light, gleaming gold and blue. "I am Alaric, king of the northern realm," he said simply. "You trespass on what is mine." The effect was immediate. The magistrate paled, his eyes widening at the royal crest visible on the medallion. The guards lowered their eyes, one dropping to a knee. "Your Majesty," the magistrate stammered, suddenly bowing low. "Forgive me. We were told a spy had abducted a noble child." "You were told lies by Lord Cassius." "Alaric, no," the king said coldly, "who seeks to prevent my alliance with your queen. Now leave, before I consider this an act of war." The men retreated hastily, mounting their horses with mumbled apologies. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what had just happened. Only when the last horse disappeared down the forest path did I find my voice. "A king," I whispered, turning to face Alaric, this stranger who had slept under my roof, eaten at my table. "You're a king." His face softened as he looked down at me. "I wanted you to know me, not my crown." Anger flared suddenly, hot and unexpected. "You lied." "I omitted," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." The trapdoor lifted, and Nessa poked her head out. "Are they gone?" I turned away from them both, moving to my herb table, where I began crushing dried leaves with more force than needed. The wall I'd built around myself for protection suddenly felt like a prison. I'd let him in, this stranger, this king, and now I stood exposed, a fool who'd believed herself special rather than simply useful. "Why come here at all?" I demanded, not looking at either of them. "Why not go to the village, reveal yourself, command whatever help you needed?" "Because Cassius has spies in every village," Alaric said, helping Nessa from the cellar. "We were attacked on purpose, to prevent me reaching your queen with a treaty proposal. Had I revealed myself in the village, word would have reached him within hours. And me? Why trust a moon-touched outcast?" My voice cracked on the words. "Because you are like those revered in my kingdom," he said, moving to stand beside me. "Because I saw your gentle hands and kind heart beneath your fear. And because Nessa saw in you what I did someone true in a world of lies." The child slipped her small hand into mine. "I told you she would help us," she said, looking up at Alaric. "The Moon Lady is good." I pulled my hand free from hers, the anger draining away, leaving only confusion and hurt in its wake. "And now? Now that the magistrate knows who you are? What happens to me when you leave? They already feared me, now they'll wonder what a king wanted with a freak like me." "Come with us," Alaric said simply, "to the northern kingdom, where your differences are honored, not feared." I looked into his eyes, those blue eyes that had seen me, truly seen me, from the first moment at the festival. For the first time, I understood the weight behind his gaze, the authority I had sensed, but couldn't name. "Kings don't travel alone with children," I said softly. "Where are your guards, your servants?" "Dead or scattered in the ambush," he answered, a shadow crossing his face. Nessa and I barely escaped. I am not just any king, Zara. I am a king who believes in seeing with his own eyes, in knowing his allies and his enemies firsthand. Outside, a bird called a warning. Alaric moved quickly to the window, peering out. "They've returned," he said grimly. "With more men." My heart sank. "The magistrate didn't believe you." Or, "Cassius's gold speaks louder than my title." Alaric turned to me, his face set in hard lines. "We need to leave now. Is there another way out?" I nodded, moving to the back of the cottage. Through the garden, then the stream path. It will lead us deeper into the forest where they won't follow. Nessa grabbed her small pack while Alaric collected his sword. I hesitated, looking around the only home I had known for 10 years. Everything I owned was here, my books, my herbs, my mother's few keepsakes. "Zara," Alaric said gently, "we must go." I grabbed only my medicine bag and my warmest cloak. As the sound of horses drew nearer, we slipped out the back door and into the shadows of the forest, leaving behind the life I had built from others' rejection. Ahead lay only uncertainty, and the strange new feeling of not facing it alone. We traveled through the forest for 3 days, following streams and animal paths where horses couldn't easily follow. Alaric moved with the confidence of someone used to the wilderness, finding edible plants and setting snares for small game. Nessa kept her small hand tucked in mine whenever the path grew steep or when darkness fell. On the morning of the 4th day, we reached a wide clearing where a small camp had been set up, 3 tents and a cook fire, with men in blue and silver uniforms standing guard. Relief washed over Alaric's face at the sight. "My royal guard," he explained, seeing my hesitation. "Those who weren't with me during the ambush. They've been waiting at our fallback point." A tall man with a graying beard rushed forward as we approached. "Your Majesty, we feared the worst when you didn't arrive on schedule." Alaric clasped the man's arm in greeting. "Captain Thorne, I'm pleased to see you and the others safe." The captain's eyes moved to Nessa, his face softening as she ran to hug him. Then his gaze landed on me, standing half hidden in the shadow of a large oak. I saw the moment he noticed my white hair and pale skin, the slight widening of his eyes, the quick look to his king for explanation. "This is Zara," Alaric said, motioning me forward. "She saved both our lives. She is under my protection and will travel with us to the capital." Captain Thorne bowed to me, no trace of fear or disgust in his manner. "We are in your debt, my lady." "My lady." No one had ever addressed me with such respect. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded, keeping my eyes lowered. The camp sprang into action at their king's arrival. Fresh clothes were brought for all of us. Food was prepared, and a tent was set aside for my use. I sat by the fire, wrapped in a cloak too fine for my rough hands, watching as Alaric spoke with his men. He moved differently here, his shoulders straighter, his voice more commanding. This was the king, not the quiet man who had carved a wooden wolf by my hearth. Nessa brought me a plate of food, sitting close beside me. "Will you tell me a story tonight?" she asked, as if we were still in my cottage rather than a military camp in the wilderness. I smoothed her dark hair. "Of course, little one." Later, when the stars appeared and the camp grew quiet, Alaric found me sitting alone by the remains of the fire. The guards kept a respectful distance, though I could feel their curious glances. "We ride north at dawn," he said, taking a seat beside me on the fallen log. "There's a coastal road that will be safer than cutting back through Cassius's territory." I nodded, staring into the glowing embers. "And then?" "We reach the northern capital in 8 days, if the weather holds. From there, I must try again to forge an alliance with the Southern Queen. Without it, war is certain." War. The word hung between us, heavy and dark. I thought of my small cottage, my garden, the simple life I had built. How far that world seemed now. "You never said why Cassius opposes this alliance," I said quietly. Alaric's face hardened in the firelight. Because peace doesn't fill his coffers. He's been selling weapons to both sides, playing each against the other. He doesn't want diplomatic solutions. And you need this alliance badly enough to risk traveling alone, without protection. His eyes met mine. I need it badly enough to try every path, even the most dangerous. Too many lives depend on it. I looked away first, unable to hold the intensity of his gaze. What will happen to Nessa when you return to being a king with responsibilities and counsels and diplomacy? She remains my ward, as she has been since her parents, my closest friends, died 3 years ago. His voice softened. She will want you near. She's grown attached. And you? I dared to ask. What do you want, Alaric? He reached for my hand, his warm fingers wrapping around mine. I want what is best for my people. I want peace between the kingdoms. He paused, then added more quietly, and I want you to find a place where you're valued for your gifts, not feared for your differences. Not a declaration of feeling, not a promise of a future together. Just another kind offering from a man, a king, who had shown me more kindness in 2 weeks than I had known in my entire life. I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt a hollow ache beneath my ribs. It's late, I said, pulling my hand from his. Nessa will be waiting for her story. The next morning, as we prepared to depart, a messenger arrived on a horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. He spoke urgently with Alaric and Captain Thorne, his face grave. I stood with Nessa, helping her fasten her cloak, but I could see the change come over Alaric, his body tensing, his jaw tightening. He crossed to us quickly. There's been a development, he said, his voice low and controlled. Lord Cassius has moved his forces to the border. My council fears an imminent attack. Fear clutched at my heart. What will you do? I must return immediately. Take the fastest route. His eyes moved from me to Nessa. But it's too dangerous for Nessa. And for you. Nessa's small fingers tightened on my hand. I want to stay with Zara. Alaric knelt before her, his large hands gentle on her shoulders. I know, little star, and you will. But I need you both to travel by the coastal road with Captain Thorne and half the guard. It will be safer. I'll meet you at the capital. You're leaving us behind, I said, the hollow feeling expanding in my chest. I'm keeping you safe, he corrected, rising to face me. Both of you mean too much to risk on a dangerous race to the border. Mean too much. The words should have warmed me, but all I felt was cold. How long will you be gone? A week, perhaps 2, depending on what I find at the border. His hand rose, hesitated, then gently touched my cheek. Wait for me at the northern palace. My staff will see you settled until I return. I wanted to lean into his touch, to ask him not to go, to tell him that in the short time I had known him, he had awakened feelings I hadn't known I was capable of. Instead, I stepped back, dropping into a small curtsy that felt foreign to my body. As you command, Your Majesty. Pain flashed across his face at my formality. Zara, the horses are ready, Your Majesty, Captain Thorne called. Alaric's shoulders straightened, the king's mask falling back into place. He knelt to embrace Nessa, whispering something in her ear that made her nod solemnly. Then he stood before me, uncertainty in his eyes. I must go, he said. I know. He reached for me suddenly, pulling me into an embrace that stole my breath. His arms were strong around me, his chest solid against my cheek. I will return, he whispered into my hair. Wait for me. Then he was gone, mounting his horse and riding away with 4 guards, not looking back as they disappeared into the forest. I stood watching long after they had vanished from sight, Nessa's small hand in mine. The cottage that had once felt like sanctuary now echoed with absence. I told myself it was better this way, that dreams born in storm-forced intimacy couldn't survive in daylight. I'd learned long ago that love was just another word for loss. And kings don't love outcasts, they use them. Will he come back? Nessa asked as we watched the remaining guards pack up the camp. I squeezed her hand gently. He's a king, little one. He'll do what kings must do. But that night, as Nessa slept beside me in our tent, I touched my fingers to my cheek where Alaric's hand had rested. And for the first time in my life, I prayed to the moon that had marked me, prayed for the safe return of a man who had seen me, truly seen me, when everyone else had looked away. Our journey to the northern kingdom took longer than expected. Heavy rains washed out the coastal road, forcing our party to take winding forest paths instead. Nessa rode with me, her small body warm against mine as we shared a horse. At night, she curled against my side in our tent, her nightmares fewer when I was near. Captain Thorne treated me with formal respect that the other guards soon copied. No one stared at my pale skin or white hair. No one whispered moon-touched or made signs against evil when I passed. It was strange to move through the world without the weight of others' fear pressing down on me. On the 12th day, we crested a hill and saw the northern capital spread below us, a city of white stone and blue roofs nestled between mountains and sea. Towers reached toward the sky, and even from this distance, I could see boats with colored sails in the harbor. It's beautiful, I whispered, my arms tightening around Nessa. Captain Thorne nodded beside me. North Haven has stood for 1,000 years. Our ancestors built with stone that catches the light like snow. As we rode through the city gates, I pulled my hood lower from old habit, but Captain Thorne gently touched my arm, shaking his head. No need for that here, Lady Zara. In the north, your coloring is seen as blessed, not cursed. I lowered my hood with shaking hands. The feeling of sun on my face without shame was foreign, frightening, and somehow wonderful. People in the streets glanced at me, but with curiosity, or even respect in their eyes, not disgust. A few children with skin as pale as mine walked freely, holding their parents' hands. The palace rose before us, its white walls gleaming in the afternoon light. Guards in blue and silver opened the gates at our approach, bowing to Captain Thorne. I felt small and out of place as we rode into a wide courtyard where servants rushed forward to take our horses. A woman in deep blue robes hurried down the palace steps, her silver hair bound in a complex braid around her head. Captain, we received word of your approach. Where is His Majesty? Lady Soren. Captain Thorne greeted her with a bow. The king rides for the southern border to address Lord Cassius's movements. He sent us ahead with his ward and Lady Zara, who is under his protection. The woman's sharp eyes moved to me, widening slightly at the sight of my pale features. I see, she said, something knowing in her tone. Come, you must be exhausted from your journey. Rooms have been prepared. I hesitated at the bottom of the steps, suddenly aware of my simple dress and travel-stained cloak. This was a royal palace, and I was a village outcast who lived in a one-room cottage at the edge of a forest. Nessa sensed my fear and took my hand. It's okay, she whispered. Alaric said we would be safe here. For her sake, I climbed the steps. Lady Soren led us through grand hallways, with ceilings so high I had to tilt my head back to see them. Tapestries depicting snowy mountains and ancient battles lined the walls. Servants bowed as we passed, their eyes lingering on me with open curiosity. These will be your chambers, Lady Soren announced, opening a door to reveal a suite of rooms larger than my entire cottage. The child's room connects to yours. Anything you require, you need only ask. When she left, I stood frozen in the center of the room. A bed with blue silk coverings dominated one wall. A window seat looked out over the city and the sea beyond. A table held a bowl of fresh fruit and a pitcher of water. Everything spoke of wealth and comfort beyond anything I had known. Nessa ran from room to room, touching the fine fabrics and giggling at her reflection in a polished silver mirror. Her joy eased some of my discomfort. and I found myself smiling as she twirled in circles, making her travel-worn dress flare out. That night, servants brought hot water for bathing and clean clothes that somehow fit us perfectly. Nessa fell asleep quickly in her new bed, exhausted from our journey. I sat by the window, watching the moon rise over the sea, wondering where Alaric was and if he was safe. 2 weeks passed in a strange, dreamlike state. Each morning, tutors came for Nessa, treating her return as routine. Each afternoon, I explored the palace gardens, which held healing herbs I had never seen before. Lady Soren visited daily, teaching me court customs with brisk patience. But of Alaric, we heard nothing. Then, on the 15th day, everything changed. I was in the garden, harvesting mint for a tea to help Nessa sleep, when Lady Soren found me. Her face was tight with worry. "Come quickly," she said. "There's news you should hear." I followed her to a large room where maps covered the walls. Several men in fine clothes stood arguing around a table. They fell silent when I entered. "Lady Zara," one man said, his tone making the title sound like a question. Lady Soren's hand pressed firmly against my back. "Tell her what you just told me, Lord Bran." The man cleared his throat. "We've received word that Lord Cassius has taken ill, gravely ill. He claims he was poisoned by a northern witch sent by King Alaric." Cold fear gripped my heart. What does this have to do with me? "The description of this alleged witch matches you, my lady. Pale skin, white hair." "That's absurd," I cried. "I've been here for 2 weeks. I haven't left the palace grounds." "We know," Lady Soren said quickly. "But Lord Cassius has seized on this as an excuse to break diplomatic relations. He's demanded that King Alaric surrender the witch to southern authorities for questioning." "And the king's response?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The men exchanged glances. Lord Bran spoke carefully. His Majesty refused, of course. He declared that no one under his protection would be surrendered based on false accusations. Relief washed through me, followed quickly by fresh fear. Where is he now? Returning to the capital? He should arrive within days. 2 mornings later, a messenger arrived at my chambers before dawn. "Lady Zara," he said, bowing low, "your presence is requested in the great hall immediately." I dressed quickly, my hands shaking as I braided my hair. Had Alaric returned? Or was there more bad news from the south? The great hall was filled with people when I arrived. Lords and ladies in fine clothes lined the walls. Guards stood at attention by every door. At the far end of the room, a group of men in unfamiliar uniforms stood before a raised dais where an ornate chair sat empty. Lady Soren materialized at my side, her hand gripping my elbow. "The magistrate from your village is here," she whispered, "with an official document from the Southern Queen." Before I could ask more questions, trumpets sounded. The crowd parted as a side door opened and Alaric strode in. He wore a blue tunic with silver embroidery and a circlet of silver on his brow. My breath caught at the sight of him. He seemed taller, more remote, every inch a king. His eyes swept the room, landing on me for the briefest moment before he ascended the dais and took his seat. Only then did I notice Nessa standing to one side, her small face solemn in a way that made my heart ache. "We recognize the representatives of the Southern Queen," Alaric said, his voice carrying throughout the hall. "Speak your piece." To my horror, Magistrate Cole stepped forward from the group of unfamiliar men. His thin face looked pinched and sour, his eyes avoiding mine as he unrolled a scroll. "By order of Her Majesty, Queen Alara of the Southern Realm, and at the request of Lord Cassius, we come to claim custody of the woman known as Zara, healer of Westwood Village." His voice rang with false authority. "She is charged with illegal practice of magic, poisoning attempts against a noble, and evading lawful arrest." Murmurs swept through the crowd. I felt dozens of eyes turn to me. and it took all my strength not to pull my old hood over my head, to hide as I always had. Furthermore, the magistrate continued, the child known as Nessa is to be returned to the custody of Lord Cassius, her lawful guardian following the deaths of her parents. Gasps echoed through the hall. Nessa made a small sound of distress, and a lady-in-waiting quickly moved to her side. Alaric's face betrayed nothing, but I saw his knuckles whiten as his hands gripped the arms of his chair. These claims are false, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Nessa has been my ward for 3 years, by written decree of her parents before their deaths, and Lady Zara has been under my personal protection since she saved both our lives. She has not left the Northern Kingdom in weeks. The magistrate sniffed. Lord Cassius has sworn testimony that the witch used her powers to send poison across the border. Her kind are known for such dark abilities. Enough! Alaric's voice cracked like thunder. You will not speak of Lady Zara in such terms in my court. I stepped forward then, unable to remain silent any longer. I am not property to be seized, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I am not an affliction to be studied. I will not go. The magistrate's face reddened. You have no choice, Moon Witch. The treaty between our kingdoms requires the surrender of criminal suspects. A treaty not yet signed, Alaric countered, and one that would never permit the surrender of innocent subjects based on superstition and lies. I looked to Nessa, who watched with frightened eyes. Something hardened inside me, a resolve I had never known before. I would not let them take her back to Lord Cassius. I would not let them use me to start a war. The child you claim belongs to Lord Cassius is under my protection now, I declared, moving to stand beside Nessa. Whatever you believe about me and my kind, she is innocent. I will not allow you to use her as a pawn in your lord's games. The magistrate sneered. Bold words from a village outcast. Guards, seize her. No one moved. The northern guards remained at attention, their eyes on their king. Even the southern soldiers hesitated, seeming to sense that they stood on dangerous ground. I lifted my chin and met the magistrate's gaze directly. Leave, or discover what else the moon has gifted me besides pale skin. A tense silence filled the hall. Then, to my surprise, Alaric laughed a short, sharp sound filled with genuine amusement. He stood from his throne, all eyes turning to him. I believe you have your answer, magistrate, he said. Now leave my court before I consider this an act of aggression requiring a military response. The magistrate and his men left with clenched jaws and stiff backs, their boots echoing on the marble floors as they retreated from the great hall. Only when the massive doors closed behind them did I realize I had been holding my breath. My knees felt weak with relief and lingering fear. Nessa pressed against my side, her small face buried in the folds of my dress. Alaric descended from the dais, his circlet catching the light as he moved. The crowd parted before him, heads bowing respectfully. When he reached me, he stopped, something softening in his regal bearing. Are you well, Zara? He asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Up close, I could see the shadows under his eyes, the new lines etched around his mouth. He looked tired, worn thin by whatever battles he had fought at the border. My lords and ladies, he addressed the court without looking away from me. I must speak with Lady Zara privately. We will reconvene the council at midday. Murmurs filled the hall, but no one objected. Lady Soren appeared at my elbow once more. I'll take the child for her lessons, she said, extending a hand to Nessa. Nessa looked up at me, uncertain. I smoothed her dark hair and kissed her forehead. Go with Lady Soren, little one. I'll find you later. Only when Nessa had gone, and the hall had emptied of all but a few distant guards, did Alaric speak again. Walk with me. He led me through a side door and down a corridor I hadn't explored before. Tall windows lined one wall, looking out over the sea far below. The morning light made the water shimmer like scattered gems. We walked in silence until we reached a small, private garden enclosed by high walls. A single tree grew at its center, its white bark luminous against blue-green leaves. "The moon ash," Alaric said, noticing my gaze. "It grows nowhere else in the world but the north. Its sap runs silver under the full moon." "It's beautiful," I said, finding my voice at last. "Zara," he turned to face me fully. "What you did in there, standing your ground against the magistrate, was brave and reckless." I lifted my chin. "I meant what I said. I won't let them take Nessa, and I won't be treated as property to be handed over on false charges." A smile touched his lips. "The frightened healer who once hid beneath the hood seems far away now. She is learning to stand in the light," I said quietly, "though it still burns sometimes." Alaric moved to a stone bench and gestured for me to join him. When I sat, he remained standing, pacing the small garden with restless energy. "There is something you should know," he began, his voice grave. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." My heart squeezed painfully in my chest. "You're sending me back." The words came out as a whisper. He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening. "No, never that. I would never hand you over to those who would harm you." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture so human, so unlike a king, that it eased some of my fear. "It's about why I was in your village in the first place. Why I sought someone like you." "Like me?" Alaric knelt before me, taking my hands in his. "There is a prophecy in my kingdom. When the moon walks in human form, 2 realms will unite under winter's crown. For generations we've awaited someone like you." I pulled my hands away. "So I am just a prophecy to you? A means to power? That's what I feared you would think." He didn't reach for me again, respecting the distance I had put between us. "The prophecy is why I first looked southward, yes. Our seers spoke of a moon-touched woman in the southern realm who would be key to lasting peace." "Lord Cassius knows of this prophecy?" Alaric nodded grimly. "He has his own interpretation. He believes that preventing the prophecy by controlling or eliminating you will ensure continued conflict from which he profits greatly." I stood and walked to the moon ash tree, placing my palm against its smooth bark. "So the attack on your caravan, the illness Nessa suffered, even the charges against me now, all because of words spoken by seers?" "Words with power," Alaric said, coming to stand beside me. "Words that frightened a greedy man enough to commit treason against his queen." "And you?" I asked, turning to face him. "Do you believe I have some magical ability to unite kingdoms?" His blue eyes met mine steadily. "I believe you have healing in your hands and courage in your heart. I believe you see clearly what others miss, both in herbs and in people. Are these not powers in their own way?" A cold thought struck me. "Nessa, you said she's been your ward for 3 years, but the magistrate claimed she belongs to Lord Cassius. Why would he want her?" Alaric's jaw tightened. "Because she is mentioned in the prophecy too, though not by name. A child shall bridge the divide, bound by neither north nor south. Nessa's mother was northern, her father southern. Cassius believes controlling her is another way to thwart the prophecy." "You used me," I said softly. "You came to my village hunting a myth, a tool for your political aims." "No." Alaric took my shoulders gently, forcing me to look at him. "The prophecy led me to look for you. But it was the woman who heals with gentle hands, who reads stories with different voices for each character, who gardens in twilight. That's who I returned for." "That's who I—" He stopped, something vulnerable crossing his face. "Who you what?" I whispered. Instead of answering, he released me and walked a few paces away. "There's more you should know. Lord Cassius has not only made accusations against you, he has raised an army. Our scouts report they're marching north, burning villages as they come." Fear clutched at my heart. "My cottage? The village?" I sent riders as soon as I learned of his movements. The villagers were evacuated to safer ground. He hesitated. Your home was already burned when they arrived. I'm sorry, Zara. The news should have devastated me. But strangely, I felt only a distant sadness. That cottage had been both sanctuary and prison, a place I had existed, but never truly lived. And now, will there be war? The Southern Queen has disavowed Cassius's actions, but she cannot control him without civil war. He's gathered too many supporters with promises of northern riches. Alaric's face was grim. I've called up our armies to defend the border, but without the alliance the prophecy speaks of, bloodshed seems inevitable. I thought of the villages in the path of Cassius's army, of families fleeing their homes, of children like Nessa caught in the flames of adults' ambitions. Something rose in me then, not fear, not anger, but a clear, cold purpose. What does it mean? I asked. To unite the realms under Winter's crown. What must I do? Alaric's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering in their blue depths. Our scholars have debated this for generations. Some believe it refers to a marriage alliance between the moon-touched one and the northern throne. My breath caught. A marriage? Others believe it refers to some act or decision that brings the realms together. He stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. I would never force such a fate on you, Zara. Prophecy or no prophecy, the choice must be yours. I studied his face, the face I had come to know first as a wounded stranger, then as a quiet companion, now as a king, bearing the weight of his people's safety on his shoulders. Yet beneath the crown and the title, I still saw the man who had carved a wooden wolf by my fire, who had held Nessa with gentle hands, who had looked at my difference and seen beauty. And if I choose to help fulfill this prophecy, I asked, what then? Something sparked in his eyes, hope, perhaps, or something deeper. Then I offer you a crown, yes, but more than that, I offer you choice. Rule with me or not, love me or not, but be free, be yourself. That is not negotiable. He knelt suddenly before me, taking my hand in his. From his pocket, he withdrew a ring with a stone that caught the light like captured moonlight. I planned 100 speeches for this moment, he said, a hint of rueful humor in his voice. None of them seem right now that you're here. Then speak plainly, I said, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he must hear it. I love you, Zara, not for prophecies or politics. I love your strength and your gentleness, your caution and your courage. I love how you care for Nessa as if she were your own. I love that you stood before my entire court and challenged them to see you as you truly are. His voice grew husky. I would join my life to yours, prophecy or no prophecy. I would share my crown, my kingdom, and my heart with you, if you'll have them. In that moment, I saw clearly the difference between being wanted for use and being wanted for existence. One diminishes, the other expands. All my life, I had been valued only for what I could provide: healing, oddity, now perhaps a fulfilled prophecy. But in Alaric's eyes, I saw something I had never dared to dream of: being valued, simply for being myself. Ask me, I whispered. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Zara, will you marry me? Will you stand beside me, not as the moon-touched one of prophecy, but as my equal, my love, my queen? I thought of the frightened girl who had hidden in shadows, who had accepted cruelty as her due. I thought of the woman who had opened her door to strangers in a storm. And I thought of who I might become, who I was already becoming, with light on my face and love in my heart. Yes, I said, as the morning ash tree cast dappled shadows across us both. Yes, I will. A year passes like the turning of seasons, each day bringing changes small and large. Tonight, I stand on the balcony of the North Tower, watching the full moon rise over the sea. Its light bathes the white city below, turning stone to silver. My skin glows in its gentle radiance, no longer hidden, no longer a source of shame. The weight of the crown still feels strange against my brow, a delicate circlet of silver with a moonstone that matches the ring on my finger. I touch it lightly, remembering the day Alaric placed it there before the gathered people of two kingdoms. The memory still warms me through like summer Sunday. Behind me, the sounds of celebration drift from the great hall. Music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Today marks 1 year since the signing of the peace treaty between North and South. 1 year since the prophecy's fulfillment, though not in the way anyone expected. There you are. I turned to find Alaric standing in the doorway, his tall frame outlined by the warm light from within. Even now, the sight of him makes my heart beat faster. He crosses to join me at the balcony rail, his arm sliding naturally around my waist. "Escaping your own celebration?" he asks, his voice warm with amusement. I lean against his solid strength, just borrowing a moment with the moon. She and I are old friends, after all. He presses a kiss to my temple. "She has blessed us all through you." "Through us," I correct gently. The prophecy spoke of both of us, though we didn't know it then. The prophecy, so simple in its truth, once we understood it properly. When the moon walks in human form, two realms will unite under winter's crown. The moon was me, not just my pale coloring, but my healer's knowledge of plants that grow in darkness, my ability to see clearly what others miss. The winter's crown was Alaric, whose kingdom of snow and ice had stood strong for generations. But the uniting of realms came not through our marriage alone, as many had believed, but through what happened after Lord Cassius's treachery was exposed. "Queen Alara asks if you'll join her for tea tomorrow," Alaric says, his thumb tracing circles on my wrist. "She wants to discuss expanding the Healing Academy to the southern provinces." I nod, pleased. The Southern Queen had proven a strong ally. Once Lord Cassius's crimes were brought to light, his plot had extended further than anyone suspected, poisoning rival lords, secretly funding border raids, even arranging the deaths of Nessa's parents when they threatened to expose him. "Will you tell her yes?" Alaric asks. "Of course. The Southern children with moon blessings need teachers who understand their gifts." I smile at the thought of the academy, my first act as queen. A place where children like me learn to use their differences as strengths rather than hiding them as curses. The door to the balcony opens again, and Nessa appears. At 8 years old now, she has grown taller, her dark hair braided elaborately for the celebration. She wears a junior healer's pendant around her neck, my gift to her when she began her training. "Queen Zara, King Alaric," she calls, excitement brightening her voice. "The other children want to hear the story again about how you saved the king and united the kingdoms." Behind her, a group of children peers shyly around the doorframe. Some have skin as pale as mine, white hair gleaming in the moonlight. Others look like any northern or southern child, but all wear the same eager expression, hungry for tales of adventure and hope. Alaric chuckles. "Again? They've heard it a dozen times." "But it's the best story," Nessa insists. "Please?" I exchange a glance with Alaric, who nods with a smile. "Very well," I say, holding out my hands to the children. "Come, let's sit in the moonlight, where all good stories should be told." The children settle around me on the wide balcony, their faces turned up like flowers seeking light. Alaric sits beside me, Nessa leaning against his knee. Below us, the city stretches to the sea, peaceful under the moon's gaze. The true story isn't about saving a king or uniting kingdoms. I begin, touching my crown, a circlet that once seemed an impossible dream for a village outcast. It's about a woman who learned that differences aren't flaws, they're gifts, waiting for the right eyes to recognize their value. Alaric takes my hand, bringing it to his lips. Tell them how you stood against a dozen guards with only a kitchen knife and the fiercest heart in the realm. I laugh, squeezing his fingers. It was 3 guards, and I was terrified. Not too terrified to stand your ground, he reminds me. Not too terrified to change your fate. I look at the children's rapt faces, especially those with pale skin like mine. Children who once might have been hidden away or sold as I was. Now they serve proudly in court, study at the academy, walk in sunlight and moonlight without shame. The most powerful magic isn't in spells or prophecies, I tell them. It's in choosing yourself, again and again, even when the world tells you that you are less. Especially then. A small girl with skin like fresh snow raises her hand. Is it true, Lord? Cassius tried to steal you away? I nod solemnly. He feared what the prophecy meant. He didn't understand that fighting fate only brings it to pass more surely. What happened to him? Asks a boy with eyes as pink as mine. He chose darkness over light, hatred over understanding, Alaric answers. When his treachery was exposed, he fled rather than face justice. They say he lives in exile now, far beyond our borders. What Alaric doesn't say is that Cassius's fall opened the way for peace. With his warmongering influence removed, Queen Alara eagerly accepted the alliance Alaric had first journeyed south to propose. The border disputes ended, trade routes opened, and most importantly, those born with moon blessings in the south were no longer persecuted but protected by royal decree. And the village? Nessa prompts. Tell them about the village. My heart swells at this part of the story. After peace was secured, I had asked for one boon, that my home village be granted royal protection and a special charter. Now it serves as a haven for those with gifts of healing, regardless of their appearance or origin. The same people who once shunned me now welcome moon-blessed children from across both realms, taught by healers trained at my academy. Sometimes, I tell the wide-eyed children, the place that once rejected you becomes the ground where new acceptance grows. The village that sold me because of fear now teaches others to see differences as strengths, not curses. A bell rings from within the palace, signaling the feast is about to begin. The children groan in disappointment. Go on, I tell them with a smile. There's honey cake for dessert, the same kind a widow once sold to a frightened girl at a festival. They scamper away, all except Nessa, who lingers. Will you and Father join us soon? Father. The word still brings tears to my eyes. 6 months after our wedding, Alaric and I formally adopted Nessa as our daughter and heir. She, who was once described in prophecy as a child bound by neither north nor south, now represents the future of both realms. We'll be right there, little one, Alaric promises. When she leaves, he turns to me, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Happy, my love? I look out over the kingdom, my kingdom, where others, with my condition, now serve proudly in court, study at the academy, walk with heads held high. I think of the alliance that has brought peace to lands that fought for generations. I think of Nessa, growing strong and confident, knowing only love, where I knew only rejection. My parents sold me because they couldn't see past my differences to my worth. I say softly. They named me for stars they hoped would guide me through darkness. They never imagined I would become the light others follow home. Alaric's arms encircle me from behind, strong and sure. You shine brighter each day. I turn in his embrace, reaching up to touch his beloved face. We are all born with shadows and light inside us. The trick isn't to eliminate the shadows, it's to learn to dance within them until they become part of your brilliance. He lowers his head to kiss me, and I rise to meet him, our shadows merging in the moonlight. From the hall below comes music and laughter, the sounds of 2 peoples united in celebration. In the city, lamps are being lit as darkness falls, but I no longer fear the night or the day. The girl who once hid from sunlight now stands bathed in moonlight by choice, not necessity. My skin, once marked as cursed, now shines as blessed. The village that sold me now sends delegations to honor me. The prophecy that some feared has brought peace instead of destruction, and the heart that once knew only loneliness now overflows with love. Alaric offers me his arm. Shall we join our people, my queen? I take it, feeling the strength in him that matches my own. Together, we walk from the balcony toward the light and music of the great hall, our shared shadows creating something stronger than either could be alone, a family forged not by blood but by choice, a kingdom united not by force but by understanding, a love born not from prophecy but from seeing each other clearly, even in darkness. Especially then.